Hey, folks, welcome to this special episode of The Distortion Den. I'm Deke, and look who's back with me, the one and only Mr. Robert Lawson. Robert, how the hell are you, buddy?
Hey, it's good to see you again.
You as well, my friend. And, Robert is here today to talk about book number 4. You're already on book number 4, and that's a book on Stevie Van Zandt, Solidarity Forever, The Art and Soul of Stevie Van Zandt. And I have to say it's a very cool cover, Robert. And also I have to add, very cool back cover. And in the writing on the back cover, you admit, super fan. So take it away. Why a book on Stevie Van Zandt? Of course, being a super fan.
I was just kind of looking for a new project to do after my 3 previous books, and Stevie is somebody, he's like a real close kind of hero to mine. I don't talk about him as much as I talk about some other people because he just doesn't have as many albums as some artists, So if somebody asks me who my favorite bands are or my favorite artists, I often won't say Stevie because there's just not that much of a reference point for people, but he is like really my all-time hero in life, and I've been obsessed with him since 1983. So when I was just thinking of something else that I could write about, I thought, well, maybe I could finally devote this much attention to his career, even though, like I say, there's a little bit less albums than some people like Nazareth or Cheap Trick. But I already have so much raw data on Stevie because I've been collecting articles and magazines and just anything about him for decades. I thought I could probably throw it together pretty easily. And then he came on board with it right away, and then a lot of his ex-band members and current band members, they all kind of joined up. So suddenly I had more input from the people I'm writing about than I've ever had with any of my previous books. Like I interviewed, I think it's like 40 people or 36 people or something for this book. And I've never had that much contact with, any of the bands for my previous books. So that all just kind of came together really well for me.
Yeah, and that's you said it right there. That's the real cool thing is you actually had the okay from the man himself. And so just take me through that whole path, like when you sent them either an email or whatever, and you said, hey, I'm writing a book on you. I know you just did your autobiography and yada, yada. But like, what was his initial reaction? Was he like, okay, this isn't going to, because I know you and your books, you write about the artist, band, their music. You don't talk backstage, groupies, hookers, cocaine. You don't go down those avenues. You focus 110% on the music, and that's all 3 of your previous books. So did you kind of have to sell it to him a bit, or?
Well, I met him. I'd already started the book. I was working on it for a couple of years during the pandemic. Right. And then he was playing a special show in Red Bank, New Jersey, I guess in 2023 now. So I flew down for that, and I met with him after the show, and I pitched it to him. And right away he was on board, like immediately. I think what tipped it over the edge was I mentioned a song or an album that he guested on in the 80s, and I was just trying to show him how deep I was going into his catalog. I said, not only am I talking about all of your albums, I'm even going to talk about this one specific, thing. And he had no memory of that. He actually did not know who that band was, what album that was, the song, nothing. And, he's kind of a funny guy in person. So he goes, sounds like I'm going to have to read this fucking book. So he signed up immediately. And I think that kind of tipped it in my favor that I was already talking about stuff that he knew it was going to be pretty deep. So we did a Zoom interview. That was 2 hours long, I think, and we covered tons of stuff. And there was a lot of stuff that he couldn't believe I was asking about. A lot of stuff he had no memory of. And then a few months later, we did a follow-up Zoom, and that one was like 90 minutes or something. So in total, we talked for like 4 hours approximately. And he was just giving me great stuff. And there was some stuff he didn't remember, which I was counting on.
Sure.
But there was a lot of stuff that, you know, he would just say, like, nobody ever asked me this much about my own music. You know, like people ask him about Sopranos, and they ask him about
of course.
his radio show and Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, but nobody really talks about his specific music that much. So I think so. That's kind of what got me in the door, and he's just been totally supportive ever since.
Yeah, well, I saw it. I guess when Springsteen rolled into Toronto, I saw him. You and I think your wife holding the book with him. So yeah,
So I was finally able to give him a copy when the E Street Band were here in Toronto, and he knew I was coming. We'd kind of planned it ahead of time, and yeah, he was like flipping through the book, and he goes, "I don't know half the stuff that's in this book."
awesome.
I had sent him a PDF previously, so I guess he had taken a bit of a look through it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he's pretty active on Twitter. So he's tweeted a few times things about the book, and whenever he does, more people learn about it because he does have a lot of followers on there, and so yeah, he's more on board with this than anyone who I've ever written about before.
Yeah, that's super cool. So it's almost authorized by him, which is basically you can't get a better endorsement than from Stevie himself. But I can tell folks out there that this is 279 pages. And like I said, with any Robert Lawson book, it's very, very detailed. I mean, you go through all his studio albums, you go through his live albums. I mean, you go through his acting career, you go through the whole Sun City, apartheid, everything. And, and that's, I learned, now I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to ask you by the end of the show what a good starting point for me in listening to the man's music would be, because it is so detailed. I think it would probably take me about 5 years to read the book if I was to go with every single song that you wrote about him, because you basically talk about his career from 1950 all the way up to 2024. And I mean, and I'm going to show a picture here, Robert, which I thought was really cool, because you talked about stuff that he didn't even know. I should actually scan this. Can you folks see this out there? That's a very, very early picture of him.
There, I have it handy.
Oh, there, perfect, man. So, and there you go. You talk about jarring his brains. I mean, I love how you put some of his quotes in when you talked about stuff or showed a picture like that. He's like, holy shit, like where'd that come? Like, what? Like that's I think that's the sell right there to somebody like that, seeing that.
Yeah, so I showed him that photo at the very beginning of our first Zoom, and that was another example of me kind of wanting to explain to him, like, this is the level that I'm working on. And yeah, he had no idea what that was. He doesn't remember. And actually it's neat because whenever that happened, he didn't think he was playing guitar that early in his life. He thought he was in a couple of bands just as the singer, but hadn't really started to play guitar yet. Because I think that photo is only like 5 or 6 months after the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan. So he was really taken aback by that, and just kind of like stunned, going like, is that true? And he would be kind of thinking like, I don't think I even knew any chords that early, but why do I have a guitar? I don't know. And it really threw him for a loop. So that was a good way of also like establishing my credentials to say, like, I'm talking about stuff that hardly anybody knows about, including him. But he got a kick out of it, I think.
Yeah, I think he did, man, just by his reaction of the quote that you put in there with him. And I mean, you go back to, that picture obviously was titled The Whirlwinds.
Yeah.
right? And you go back into like his early bands, like the Gingerbread Band, and I think at one time, I'm not too sure if it's that band, but the other thing I found in this book was how the E Street Band members are all intertwined with each other from way back then. I mean, Bruce Springsteen was actually playing, correct me if I'm wrong, was actually playing guitar in a band fronted by Stevie at one point, right?
Yeah, and they all, yeah, they were very intertwined.
Yeah.
Like you say, so that's interesting. Like there's a period of like 3 years or so in New Jersey that all these guys are in each other's bands, and sometimes it's the exact same guys and they just change the name.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes Steven's the lead vocalist and Bruce is on rhythm guitar. Sometimes Bruce is on lead vocals and Steven plays more guitar. Sometimes just one or two members change out, but basically Steven and Bruce, Gary Talent, who's the E Street Band bass player, the three of them were in like a lot of groups together, and then other guys kind of come and go, Southside Johnny, and there's a whole bunch of different names, but for that 2 or 3 year period there, it's like they were in like 25 bands or something, and they're just changing all the time. Like I didn't realize, one early band that is pretty notorious that a lot of Bruce Springsteen fans know about was called Dr. Zoom and the Sonic Boom. And they're just kind of known because there was like 20 people in the band and they had a Monopoly game off to the side and a baton twirler and stuff. I didn't realize until I was really looking into it, that group only ever played 2 shows.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But it just gets talked about a lot, mostly because of the Monopoly game that they would have people, playing a board game on stage. But yeah, they only existed for 2 shows, and then they changed to something else, and then constantly changing. So it does show how far back these guys go, and how they really came up together. Like a lot of people know that Steven and Bruce have a history, but they might not know exactly how deep that history goes. That there were so many different groups, and sometimes they would be in a different band, and they would be like opening for each other, or they would be like co-headliners. But so they were just spending a lot of time together as teenagers.
Yeah, and that's and that just carries right through into when Springsteen became Springsteen. And another thing that was interesting to me was when he left, when Stevie left, right before, I guess, Born in the USA was basically dominate the charts on singles and album sales everywhere. I never really knew what that whole reason was. I read the Springsteen book and he kind of talked about it, but it was never a big trashing of each other. I mean, they just kind of, I guess Stevie wanted to have a little more control, and Springsteen kind of said, there is no control. I am control. And I get it. I mean, it's 84. I mean, they're all young guys at that time, but I guess where I'm going with this is he leaves the Springsteen band. He doesn't sit idle, Stevie. Excuse me. He goes deep diving right into Sun City, which I found to be that chapter and Apartheid chapter, probably my 2 favorite chapters of your book, because obviously I remember it, but you went into the massive deep dive into it. And, so take me back to, that whole falling out with Bruce leading into him keeping moving.
Well, at the time, they kept up appearances. They in '84, they never said that there was anything kind of bad between them. They just didn't. They really kept it above board. And I talked to them about that a little bit, like how they really kept things covered up. They just said it was mutual. Steven was going to concentrate on his solo stuff. Bruce had this new album, so he had to tour. On the whole Born USA 2-year tour, Steven did join the band 10 times during the encores as a special guest.
Yeah.
and it was during that time that he did Sun City, so Bruce appears on that. So it seemed like it was kind of a mutual thing, and that things were still good. It was only really when Bruce's book came out that he talked about it, that they had like basically a huge fight, and Steven quit the band. And then Steven's book came out, and he confirmed that that's what happened. But they never said that for years and years. They really made it appear that everything was cool in public. And even though they were seen together often, yeah, I guess there was a bunch of bad blood behind the scenes. But it's hard to imagine it going any other way, because if he had stayed with Bruce and did the whole Born USA 2-year world tour, yeah, Sun City wouldn't exist. So then you have a whole political movement that he had global impact on, not happening. So it's hard to think that he should have stayed with Bruce. I mean, I'm glad he didn't, because otherwise his whole solo career, who knows, it might not even exist.
True.
But the Sun City record for sure wouldn't have happened, because he was recording that and like flying to London, England, to get people on tape while the Born USA tour was happening. So he wouldn't have been able to participate in that. So I think it all worked out. I know Steven likes to talk about it like he made the biggest mistake of his life, because it's right when the band, became as big as they would ever become, and he walks out. But I think he just had to do that. I mean, that's what was in his heart. And he had a new album out at the same time called Voice of America that he was very connected with, and really meant a lot to him. So it just kind of had to happen. And, in the Steven documentary on HBO called Disciple, there's a quote from Bruce where he says that he was having, his greatest success. He's touring these huge stadiums all over the world, and it didn't feel right because his best friend wasn't beside him to experience it with him.
Yeah, true.
So it's interesting how we know just so much more about that situation than we ever did in the 80s. Bruce would like dedicate a song to Steven almost every night on that tour. So there's still a lot of love between them. But apparently they had a big fight. Steven wanted to be the official music director for the E Street Band, and Bruce just wouldn't give it up.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess I guess he probably viewed it, or Bruce viewed it as, hey, I'm cutting everybody's checks. So, like it's a business, but at least they didn't get a little personal, but not overly personal. I mean, when you think of mid 1980 band breakups, I mean, no bigger band breakup and a lot of dissing thrown at each other than was David Lee Roth exiting Van Halen. You wouldn't see David Lee Roth getting up on stage at a Van Hagar concert in '86, right? So, I mean, it goes to show you that, like you said, they kept everything above board. He kept showing up to certain shows. And I think the other fact that I read in your book was that they actually filmed the Glory Days video when he was already out of the band, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he came back to...
Yeah, so I had no idea, because whenever I saw the Glory Days video back in the day on Much Music and hear it on the radio, obviously he was in the band at the time on the radio, but the video version, I thought, oh, they probably just, cut 5 videos right off, and then, they shelve them, and then when it comes time to release. But, that's the kind of stuff you learn in Robert's book, man. Those little tidbits. And, so it goes to show you, like, their bond, like you mentioned. So, yeah, pretty cool. And like you said, the whole Sun City thing, I remember that because obviously for the cause, of course, and like you said, he had the whole gauntlet of, Peter Gabriel, Bono, bunch of, heavy hitters at the time helping him out. And I found interesting that one part where you said that at one point they had a bunch of lyrics that got edited out where they were calling out artists who did play Sun City, like Queen, Rod Stewart, Linda Ronstadt, Julio Iglesias, and the OJs. So, I mean, but then, somebody probably at the record company went, oh, no. So
right.
They were really going for grabbing the bull by the horns with it. And you got to respect them for that.
it's a neat twist that so they had these lyrics that are calling out people who played Sun City, and Stephen wasn't really comfortable with that. One of the people listed being Rod Stewart, and then Stephen told me, and I don't think it's ever been published anywhere before my book came out, that Rod Stewart actually wanted to be on Sun City.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's just that, and Stephen wanted him to be on, but it was so late. They had already done like all this mixing, and they'd been staying up for like 48 hours at a time, doing this really complicated mix because people were sending in tapes from their own home studios. You know, it wasn't like We Are the World where everyone got together in one studio and everybody sang a line. There were tapes flying all across the United States. Jackson Browne's recording him and Bob Dylan together in LA, and then shipping those tapes to Stephen and the co-producer Arthur Baker in New York. So they had a lot of problems, and there's a lot of, you know, issues with getting the tapes all to sound good. You know, I maintain that when Daryl Hall sings his certain line in the song, it sounds to me like there's a little bit of tape flutter there. Like I think the tape was actually damaged on the finished song. But so yeah, Rod Stewart wanted to be a part of it, and it was just too late. They just couldn't do it. It was like way, you know, too late to get him involved, which was amazing to me just to learn that, because I never knew that a guy who was called out in the original lyrics as sort of doing something bad, that he actually wanted to be on the song to, I guess, make amends in a way.
Yeah, I had to flip your page back when I read that. I thought, okay, Stevie's saying that Rod Stewart wanted to be part of it. Didn't he just out him in the lyrics?
Yeah, right.
I went, holy crap, yeah, he did. But I guess maybe he realized his errors in the way, like shouldn't have done it for the paycheck when a lot of it wasn't the thing to do at the time. But yeah, a lot of, you know, like that's a whole interesting basically music history lesson. I mean, and you know, and the other thing too is Stevie actually went to South America or South, you know, and so he wasn't just reading like Wall Street Journal, National Geographic. He actually went to South Africa and saw what was going on. So he had
he went there twice, and purely to learn what was happening and to talk to groups. He didn't perform there. He wasn't on tour or anything. He went there to meet with like the African National Congress and different political groups down there to find out what exactly, you know, was happening, and that's how he kind of formed his opinion to put the song together.
Yeah, I mean, so he, like I said, he was like first-hand witness, so he could really deep dive into it. I mean, he totally pulled it off, and then, you know, you go into, I think it was 1988, and he's part of the whole apartheid, amnesty and peace, and again, you know, he did the concerts, and they had like Bryan Adams, U2, Sting, Peter Gabriel, Lou Reed, Joan Baez, the Neville Brothers, which are all mentioned in your book, of course. And, you know, getting death threats. And, geez, I mean, it was just like, I'm sitting at home watching it on Much Music. You know, you don't know the whole backstory to it. So, you know, another interesting time in his life. I mean, it must have been just utter chaos. Yet he pulled it off.
Well, he made a conscious decision that he's going to really devote all of his time and his music, his art to politics.
Yep.
So he got very involved with what was going on in South Africa. He also got very involved with Native Americans' rights in the States, and very interesting that we're talking about this today, that you know, he wrote a song in 1989 about a political prisoner in the United States named Leonard Peltier, who's been in prison for decades. And it was actually just announced, I guess, yesterday morning that he's finally getting out of prison. One of the last things that President Biden did in the White House was allow Leonard Peltier to get out of prison. So even though Stephen's song about him was in 1989, it's taken this long to actually get him out. So that's it. I didn't know that was ever going to happen. But so Stephen just got so deep, and you know, he was also writing about some issues in South America. He's got a song called Los Desaparecidos, which is about the government basically disappearing people. Like if you this was in 83, 84, if you speak out against your government, then you just one day you're just not there anymore.
Yeah.
And your family doesn't know where you went. You're just gone.
Yeah.
He's got a song called Bitter Fruit, and that's also about a lot of that kind of stuff too. So he just really went deep, and played a lot of benefit concerts for different causes that he believed in, and really became known as a political musician more than just kind of a rock and roll guy or a guitar guy. He went really, really deep into a lot of these issues that were important to him.
Yeah, and while he's doing all that, he's still creating music. And another one I found real interesting. I mean, musically, he's always worked with heavy hitters. I mean, he had Pat Thrall on guitar, T.M. Stevens on bass. The one I found real interesting is that he was, for a while there, he was doing a bit of a power trio with Adam Clayton on bass and Jason Bonham on the drums. I was like, wow, I think I don't know if any of that stuff's up on YouTube, but if it is, I'm going to have to check that out. It sounds like, wow, that's a trio.
That's definitely his heaviest album. If you want him to be as close to hard rock or metal, the Born Again Savage album is it's a power trio record. If anyone uses Spotify or Apple Music, there's a Solidarity Forever playlist.
Oh, okay.
On both of those platforms where you can follow along. It's most of the music that I talk about in the book in order. So that's a way to kind of get up to speed quickly if you use either Apple or Spotify.
I do use Apple, and yeah, that's a good heads up. I'll definitely download it to my library for sure. I mean, if it's like basically a career retrospective, basically.
Yeah, I think it's like 2.5 hours, or I'm not sure. I haven't looked at it in a while, but it goes through every chapter of the book, all the kind of more important songs that I thought should be listened to.
Oh, that's awesome. And not only was he doing that, but he was also producing, and he produced one of my favorite rock and roll guys, and that's Mike Monroe, formerly of Hanoi Rocks, and he did the Not Faking It album back then. And obviously, when I bought it at the time, I mean, I'm sure me and you are cut from the same cloth when it comes to any new CD release or album release back then, or even today. You're scouring the credits. So
Right.
when you scour the credits, I go, wow, like Little Steven, like no way. So, Dead Jail Rock and Roll. And it's pretty cool. I mean, even over the years, he would hop up on stage, vice versa with each other, and they would jam it out still. So, Steven has some real rock and roll in him. I mean, I love that Monroe record, Not Faking It. So
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's good. And he also kept moving. And then he did this one, which he's not too proud of.
Oh.
Which I kind of like it. But I get it. The guy, I'm not going to name the guy. He's named in your book, but he was a mess. And
yeah,
case in point, I even knew back in 92 because I was supposed to see them. They were opening for Bryan Adams and Steve Miller. They were supposed to be, I think, the fourth band after Extreme actually was on the bill as well. And it was the Archangels. And I thought, cool. And they didn't even make the tour. Like, I think they disintegrated like back in 92. So, yeah. So, I mean, the hits and misses. And like, I think you mentioned in the book that that's all Stevie did was produce. He was not hands-on like he was with other records. And he basically said that the one guy in the band was a disaster. So to deal with, and he would never deal with it again. So, but I kind of like some of the songs. So, I mean,
a lot of people like that record.
Yeah.
A lot of people like that record for sure. Steven was more concentrating on other projects. He took kind of a break from doing his own solo music.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. He's writing songs for Michael Monroe, who is on the Sun City record.
That's right.
And then Archangels. There's a group called Lone Justice out of LA. Majek Feshek was a Nigerian reggae artist that Steven got involved in. So he was keeping busy doing musical projects, and then eventually he reunited with Southside Johnny for an album called Better Days, which was a big kind of Asbury Park, New Jersey reunion album of a lot of those people who played in those earlier bands all coming back together.
Yeah, and I think that one came out in 91, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think, yeah, it's just amazing that every year he just kept doing something. I mean, some of these guys, they quit bands and they go underground, and then 5, 6 years later, oh, here's my solo album. And but no, once he left Bruce in 85 or 84, whatever it was, he kept it moving, like you said, until he returned. So who who asked who to go back to the E Street Band? Was it Bruce asking him back, or did he kind of say, "Hey"?
Well, Bruce broke up the E Street Band at
I
one
remember
point.
that. Yeah, I remember that was I remember Clarence Clemens was. I remember reading about it in Rolling Stone at the time, and he was none too happy about it.
Right. So Bruce is playing with some other musicians, and he but the E Street Band were never all that far away.
No.
Like they did get back together just to record a couple of new songs on a greatest hits album. And then they finally did a full-blown kind of E Street Band reunion tour, which I think was in '99. So this was the first time that you have the two people who replaced Steven, Paddy Sky Alpha on vocals and Nils Lofgren on guitar, and Steven himself. So that version of the band had never existed in the group's history of having Steven and his replacements all together. But and then Steven's just been back ever since. So anytime that there's an E Street Band album or tour, he's just in the band again. But I guess maybe being able to manage his time a little bit better.
Yep.
That he still does his side projects. So in between E Street Band tours, he's doing television stuff, or he's doing his own albums, his own tours. He's actually done more of his own music, like in the last 10 years, than he had done in the first 30 years, because he's put out multiple studio albums and live DVD, Blu-ray concerts, and he's more active than ever at this age.
Yeah, and for sure. And even in the back of your book, you have, you break down his vinyl albums, from even different releases in different countries. And you have all his 7-inch singles, his 12-inch singles. It's all there. And like I said at the start of the show, it's all very detailed. I mean, if you want the deep dive in any band or artist, you're the guy to get the books from. But and you talk about Nils Lofgren, which I also found kind of cool in the book, was that you never know how you're going to feel about somebody replacing you in a band. And I thought it was pretty cool that when Stevie would play Nils Lofgren's Neck of the Woods, Nils Lofgren would show up and they would jam. So you knew it wasn't like, hey man, you stole my, you got my gig and yada, yada. That shit can go on and on and on. But it always seemed like you basically a brotherhood, no matter who is in or out of the band. Once you're in, you're in, I guess, just kind of like the Sopranos, right?
Well, and that's, to what you were kind of mentioning about Dave Roth earlier, that's something that really came apparent to me when I was talking to all these people. And I told this to Steven too. There's people who used to be in his band, that he doesn't frankly remember, and they all speak really fondly about their time with him.
Yeah.
So the connection that he makes, I mean, there's a few people he's fallen out with, but the connection that he makes with a lot of these people just goes back years and years, and it's really tight. And that's so refreshing compared to, like a Dave Roth situation where they're just talking shit about each other constantly, and, when David Lee Roth left Van Halen, I mean, there was a new Van Halen record that a lot of people loved and people were going to see Van Halen. Dave had a terrific album out. He was touring. Should have been good. But the one thing, Dave wouldn't do is he wouldn't talk shit about the band on stage. But Van Halen did. On every night of their tour, they would make little jokes and comments about Dave. And, as a fan, it's, it's like you're watching your parents fight every day or something. It's just,
Yeah.
it's just not fun. And, some people like both those records, but
Yep.
you were kind of told that you had to choose, you're not allowed to like both.
Mhm.
And anytime, a band is like airing that kind of dirty laundry in public, it just really doesn't sit well with me, really makes me uncomfortable. You guys are like multi-millionaires with our money and you're so unhappy, you're so miserable that you're just like bitching and moaning about each other all the time. I find it really distasteful. So that's part of the reason why I don't talk about a lot of the behind the scenes stuff in my books.
Mhm.
But I really got even more respect for Steven and a lot of the musicians that he plays with, because some of them didn't really want to talk until they knew for sure Steven was on board. And when I pitched it to him in Red Bank, New Jersey, and I got a photo with him, and I started sending that to some of these people, and they were like, I'm in. Immediately, as soon as they knew that Steven was okay with it, they were in. And, that's how I ended up talking to like I said, over like 35 or 40 people, because they were all just like, yeah. And I even talked to a couple of guys who frankly don't speak with Steven anymore. Like they have had a falling out, but they still believe in the music enough that they want it to be a part of the book. And I don't think you would get that in, a lot of different bands at the times when things aren't good. When Joe Perry left Aerosmith, just like a nightmare of fighting back and forth and bitching and moaning and, just terrible. Like, I'm not saying you got to be best friends, but sometimes you got to work with somebody that you don't really like.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No shit. And I mean, I think the Aerosmith thing, goes back to, and I think over spilt milk or whatever is the tall tale, whether, so the wives throwing milk at each other, so,
Right.
and yeah, whatnot. But yeah, I mean, is there really anything else you'd like to add to this book? Like, I know you're big on the socials, like with Facebook, Instagram. You're on Twitter as well, and so obviously, copy still available.
Yeah. I mean, it really just came out kind of officially in November, I guess. I didn't have my hardcovers actually, I think, till the end of November. So it's still like considered a kind of a new release. So people can reach out to me, or they can get it on Amazon or through the publisher's website. Just trying to get the word out as much as possible. There's a lot of music detail in there, and a whole chapter on Sopranos, whole chapter on his other mob show, Lilyhammer.
Yeah.
So really, if there's almost anything that you want to know about Steven's life and career, it's going to be in this book.
And speaking of Stevie being on The Sopranos, that was another thing I learned in your book. Was I had no idea that was his character's name on The Sopranos? Silvio Dante, right?
Yeah.
Didn't realize that his on-screen Sopranos wife is his actual real life wife. So, there you go.
Yeah,
there's another thing I learned in your book. I was like, no kidding. Like, wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all there, folks. And if you want to do a deep dive, a lot of music history, a lot of interviews, like Robert said, it's very well done. And I'm a big supporter of his books. And he's got the Guess Who book, Wheatfield Empire. He's got the Razmanaz Nazareth book. And one of my all-time favorite reads, still to this day, still competition. Right. Whenever I listen to Cheap Trick, Rob, I always will pull it out. And that's the great thing about these kind of books is you can basically start anywhere. If I have a real crazy moment where I want to listen to the Doctor, I'll read your chapter on the Doctor, right? So,
but, it could happen. It could happen, I guess.
It could happen. It has happened. But I wanted to thank you for coming on the Distortion Den and talking about the books. And always feel free to come back. I mean, it's almost been, it has been a year, because the last time we spoke, we were looking for a subject to talk about. And that whole Guess Who fiasco just dropped into our lap. And
we
talked about that and Bachman Turner Overdrive. And I understand there's still no Turner in the Bachman, but I guess the Guess Who tribute acts have kind of all.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
that's right.
I have that show. It's up on, you'll find it on my YouTube channel, The Distortion Den. And a year before that, me and Robert did a real deep dive into Cheap Tricks Live at the Whiskey, limited release CD box set, which done really well. Thanks to Rob sharing it around to a bunch of Cheap Trick sites. And I thank you for doing that, sir. And yeah, anything you want to wrap up with, or you're working on anything currently, or?
I'm working on a little bit of something right now for the month of January, but after that, I don't think I'm doing any more books. I think I'm done. But you know, the little things will pop up here and there, and you know, I'll keep definitely listening to music and probably making my top 10 lists and all that kind of nerd stuff, but more just on social media, less actually in books, I think.
Nice. Well, maybe we'll have to do a top 10 list of some band down the road and go from there, and definitely get you back on. You're always welcome to come on the show. It's always great talking music. You love your books, man. And yeah. And I have to give a shout out to my pal T-Bone, who's done the fantastic artwork for the show, cover Solidarity Forever. And also find Distortion Den t-shirt that he just came up with the logo. Next thing you know, it's stuffed in my mailbox was a t-shirt and hat. So anybody wants a t-shirt or hat, and I'm not doing t-shirts and hats. I'm not a merch guy, but I'll forward your info to T-Bone, and you can do it yourself. So anyways, but I had to give him a shout out. I've been meaning to now for a while. So Robert, as always, thanks. And like I said, we'll be talking very shortly down the road again.
Sounds good.
All right, buddy. Take care.